Tonight, interest rates fall to a 30-year low, but the economy slides towards recession. Telstra records the biggest half-year profit in Australia's corporate history. And a scathing report on the state's problem-ridden ambulance service. Good evening, Richard Morecroft with ABC News. Also tonight, the government struggles with its lowest ever opinion poll result and an encouraging new treatment for leukemia. But first, the federal government is reeling and the financial markets are stunned by today's national accounts, which showed the economy went hard into reverse late last year. It was the first negative figure since the last recession in 1991. The gloom for the government was lightened slightly by another Reserve Bank interest rate cut, which has been quickly passed on to home lenders.
No matter how big the entourage, it's still a lonely walk for a treasurer about to explain how and why the country's halfway to a recession.
The December quarter detraction of 0.6% is a very disappointing result.
The contraction, as Peter Costello called it, is the first time the economy's gone into reverse since the last recession nearly a decade ago. And it's a dive, not just a dip, into the negative by 0.6%, deeper than any of the market forecasts. It means that in one quarter, the annual growth rate has halved from 4.2 to just 2.1%.
Prime Minister, will you now finally admit that your claims that the GST would be good for the economy were completely wrong and that it is now swinging like a wrecking ball through the Australian economy?
Those figures are disappointing. Those figures, of course, are for one quarter.
The government conceded just one GST effect, the short-term hit on housing, which plunged by more than 15% in the quarter. The Treasurer said the rest of the economy was fine.
So, in other words, 95% of the economy showed good, strong growth.
And that's where today's more welcome economic news came in.
Interest rates have fallen again today, which will also be positive for the housing industry.
The Reserve Bank coming to the rescue with a further 0.25% cut in official rates. Together with last month's 0.5% reduction, it wipes out the last 3 rate rises of last year, some of which the Prime Minister now says were ill-judged.
I would have to say that there was an error of judgment made in relation to some of the adjustments, yes.
The Prime Minister and the Treasurer want to blame everyone but themselves. They're the ones that want to claim ownership and credit when the economy's going well. When it's going badly, they blame everyone else.
The government is making economic management its primary pitch for the next election, which means today's national accounts were particularly painful. Russell Barton, ABC News, Canberra.
Mortgage rates began to tumble within minutes of the Reserve Bank's rate cut. The big 4 banks and most other lenders have now announced they'll pass on the full 0.25%, making the standard variable home loan rate will be 7.32%.
Reserve Bank cut by 25 points.
The first major bank to seize the public relations opportunity and pass on the cut was Westpac.
We're trying to be as responsive to our customers as we can be. They've given us some feedback. They want us to move quicker. We're moving quicker.
Non-bank institutions joined the rush.
We'll give them $33 per month relief off their current repayment schedule.
By late this afternoon, all the 3 remaining major banks announced they too would be passing on the 0.25% cut to their customers. And it'll be swift. Westpac will move on the 14th of this month, the Commonwealth and the ANZ the 16th, and the National Australia Bank the 19th. The day's economic news was a double-barrelled hit on the Australian dollar. The cut in interest rates, combined with the weak national accounts, saw the value of the currency fall further. Not long after the Reserve Bank's announcement, the Australian dollar was trading at just above 51 US cents. Traders expect it to test its previous record low overnight.
Well, a retest of that historic low of 50.7 US cents that we saw back in November is certainly likely in coming days. Investors are remaining very negative towards the Australian dollar. They're looking for the bad news on the currency, and a move towards even that critical 50 US cent level is quite possible.
Currency dealers believe growing opposition within the government to the possible takeover of Woodside by the Dutch multinational Shell has also spooked foreign investors. A successful takeover would result in the purchase of billions of Australian dollars, helping to shore up the currency. They argue the issue will become a litmus test for the government on whether it welcomes foreign investment or not. John Shovlin, ABC News, Sydney.
Telecommunications giant Telstra has unveiled a mammoth half-yearly profit. After tax, profit for the 6 months to December was more than $2.6 billion.
Telstra chief Ziggy Switkowski called it a strong financial performance. It was delivered largely on the back of cost control.
Service improvement and cost reduction can coexist.
Telstra recorded an after-tax profit of $2.62 billion, up 25%, but that result includes more than $600 million in one-off profits. Shareholders will receive a dividend of 8 cents a share. Sales revenue rose a credible 5%, while costs were kept under control. Growth in the internet and wireless businesses helped offset a loss in market share in local and long-distance telephone calls. The Telstra chief says cost-cutting remains an important tool in delivering performance during the predictable difficulties ahead.
You know prices will continue to fall in our industry. Further market share losses may yet occur with Telstra, and demand for our products may temporarily slow if the economy slows.
But analysts still found a number of encouraging signs.
The trends in terms of margins, in terms of operating expenses, and in terms of capital expenditure were all very positive.
Also, the mobile area, Telstra On Air has done a reasonably good job considering the strong competition in the cellular market.
The share market reflected the positive response with heavy trading in Telstra shares. The profit result combined with a general lift in global sentiment towards the telecommunications sector to give Telstra's share price its biggest daily lift in 10 months. Phillip, Lasker, ABC News.
Back to Canberra now, and while the government took a heavy economic blow today, its problems didn't end there. It's also digesting an unpalatable message from a new opinion poll, indicating the coalition will lose next week's Ryan by-election. But Labor claims they'll still face a tough time winning the Liberal stronghold.
Gloom, doom and despair are order of the day in government ranks.
I just can't believe that people have forgotten what 13 years of Labor did to small business.
But today's Morgan poll suggests that for the moment they have. Never have the coalition stocks been lower, leaving Labor in an election-winning position.
The Australian electorate has decided to take a baseball bat to the Howard government.
The first test will be next week's by-election in the blue ribbon Liberal seat of Ryan, never held by Labor in its half-century history. The Morgan poll suggests that even a 9.5% cushion is not enough to secure the seat for the coalition.
If that is true, then it shows how very much out of touch Mr Howard has become.
It may be easy pickings today, but there will come a time when you actually have to tell the Australian people what you stand for.
I would say our loss in Ryan would mean any seat, not necessarily a coalition seat. It's not safe.
Liberal strategists insist the Morgan poll accurately reflects the coalition standing both nationally and in Ryan, and admit there's not one circuit breaker in sight for the government. On the other hand, Labor says it will still be tough to wrest Ryan from the Liberals, in particular because the opposition will need the votes of people who have never voted Labor in their lives. Nevertheless, Kim Beazley gained another boost today. His commitment to national regulation of land clearing, a key issue in Queensland, has won the backing of the resurgent Greens, and in principle agreement on a preference swap in Ryan.
Labor has stolen the march on the government as far as land clearing is concerned.
And with the Greens polling around 5% in Ryan, their preferences may well decide the result. Jim Middleton, ABC News, Canberra.
Inefficient, badly run and hamstrung by ancient work practices. That's the state of the New South Wales ambulance service, according to a scathing report by the Auditor-General. The study has found ambulance response times in Sydney are among the worst in Australia, and accurate performance assessments are impossible.
Believe the Auditor-General, and it's the ambulance service that needs emergency help.
The New South Wales ambulance service is failing in its aim of being a world-class leader in its field. Despite additional funding and staffing, ambulance response times are behind most other states and do not appear to be improving.
The audit report is scathing. A $30 million computer dispatch system installed 2.5 years ago, still not working properly. Accurate data on ambulance response times doesn't even exist.
The service's internal reporting of response times is unreliable.
So comprehensive is the criticism of ambulance management, industrial relations and efficiency, the Health Minister was left with little choice but to admit to the shortcomings.
We still see an ambulance service not performing as well as we want on response times, not delivering the quality of service we expect.
Blockages in the health system also slowing things down. Gosford Hospital on the Central Coast reporting that 10 or 11 ambulances queuing up to unload patients is not uncommon. The reason, not enough beds inside.
Hospital emergency departments can almost regard ambulances as an extra ward.
The same hospital also finding the ambulance service so inefficient it stopped using it to transport non-urgent cases. The Minister says improvement is needed across the board.
The whole system is under criticism here, and it recognises that there is a need for substantial improvement, and that's what I expect.
The ambulance union says chronic staff shortages are to blame for many of the problems. The opposition claims the ambulance crisis is risking lives.
I have been told that 2 patients have died in recent weeks because of an inadequate response due to problems with the computer-aided dispatch system.
The Minister admits that taxpayers haven't been getting value for money out of the ambulance service, but says he won't be setting unrealistic deadlines for management to lift their game. Ben Wilson, ABC News, Sydney.
The state government is under scrutiny over child welfare again, with claims that officers took more than 2 weeks to interview a child allegedly sexually abused. For the second time in a week, public school principals have criticised delays in reporting cases to the government's child abuse hotline. The principals say the Department of Community Services took 18 days to intervene in the case of a 15-year-old boy.
It was a very significant child sexual assault that had been taking place over a 2-year period of time.
But the Minister told Parliament that teachers don't have to wait on hold if they don't want to.
They're sitting on the phone for an hour because they choose to do so. There is a fax machine. There is a fax machine. There is a fax machine.
The Minister's office says the case was handled appropriately. 3 people are in hospital and 29 others are injured after a bus crash in central Queensland. The bus, carrying mainly school children, was clipped from behind by a truck when it stopped to pick up passengers.
The bus was travelling from Mount Morgan to Rockhampton at around 7:30 when it crashed near Gracemere.
I had to slow down to stop on the side of the road here to pick up some more people, and it would appear that it's been clipped at the back by another vehicle, which is a truck.
The bus wasn't fitted with seatbelts. All 32 on board were injured. Most of the passengers were school children.
There's some minor injuries, broken collarbone that I know of, and cuts and abrasions, and of course the kids are in a lot of shock, and you can understand that.
A 13-year-old girl remains unconscious in intensive care. A 71-year-old woman and 10-year-old boy are also in the Rockhampton-based hospital with serious injuries.
They've been through a fairly traumatic experience, but they're doing very well considering what they've been through.
Parents rushed to the scene after being told of the accident.
It's pretty horrific for the parents and the families that are here, but all in all, I think they're going to do pretty well.
Passengers and their families are receiving counselling. Local MP Jim Pearce was driving by when the accident happened.
I spent a lot of time with one little lass there. She was more concerned about her brother. She was very, very brave. She actually pulled her brother off the bus.
Authorities are investigating the accident. At the same time, a task force is looking into safety standards for buses. It'll consider whether seatbelts need to be installed in all buses. Kieran McKechnie, ABC News.
Australian researchers have developed a technique which improves the effectiveness of bone marrow transplants for children with cancer. Doctors at Sydney's Children's Hospital have found that by manipulating white blood cells in donated bone marrow, they can boost a patient's chances of survival.
18-year-old Jean Marie has been treated for acute lymphoblastic leukemia since she was 7. After a relapse 2 years ago, she had a bone marrow transplant using a new technique developed at Sydney's Centre for Childhood Cancer at the Children's Hospital at Randwick.
We're much relieved about this research that we're having for giving Jean Marie second chance to live fruitful life.
Jean Marie was given bone marrow from an unrelated donor. To reduce the risk of complications, researchers have found by removing some of the T cells or white blood cells, the patient's chances of a full recovery are increased.
Overall, roughly more than 50% of the children having this type of procedure will be expected to be cured of their disease.
While survival rates for children with leukemia are good, 1/3 of those diagnosed will relapse. Researchers say this procedure will minimise the chance of a potentially fatal side effect called graft versus host disease, where foreign tissue attacks the body.
We see this as a major advance in treating the disease. Certainly the impact is that the duration of time in hospital is markedly reduced, and the children and their family get back to their home quicker.
Australian bone marrow experts say it's a major step forward.
It should mean that patients who otherwise would not be cured can now be cured, and more importantly, be cured without side effects.
It's hoped the new technique will become standard treatment for cancer patients around Australia, but for one patient at least, it's offered new hope. Sophie Scott, ABC News.
NATO is becoming increasingly concerned about fighting along the border between Kosovo and the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. In recent weeks, armed Kosovo Albanians have clashed with Macedonian troops, and hundreds more peacekeepers have been sent to the region. Now, NATO is considering allowing Yugoslav forces into the border area to help curb the guerrilla insurgency. NATO created the buffer zone on the border to protect Kosovo's ethnic Albanians from harassment by Serb troops after the province was partitioned from Yugoslavia. Israel is expected to have a new government within hours. After weeks of wrangling, Prime Minister-elect Ariel Sharon has brought together a national unity coalition. His main priorities: to settle months of bloodshed and security problems.
There are two highway codes in the Gaza Strip. If you're Israeli, you get an army escort. If you're Palestinian, you follow orders at the point of a gun. The army is here to give Jewish settlers safe passage to and from their homes, to places like Kfar Darom, where inside the compound, soldiers are on guard against an enemy who doesn't wear a uniform. Israel says its security blockade of Gaza is to stop that enemy exporting terror. The million or so Palestinians now confined to this narrow strip of land see it as collective punishment. Tens of thousands can't get to the jobs they once had across the border. The economy is in freefall. And the security closure forces up the price of fruit and vegetables from Israel. The cost of everything from onions to avocados has doubled at a time when people can least afford it. A UN report says 30% of Gazans are living below the poverty line.
Defining security arrangements for the Gaza Strip and the West Bank will be the new Israeli government's most pressing concern. Every bombing, every shooting inside Israel produces calls for tougher action. But turning Gaza into an open-air prison hasn't worked so far. If anything, it's made matters worse.
Gaza's squalid refugee camps are already fertile recruiting grounds for militant groups like Hamas and Islamic Jihad. What happens when there's no work, no money, no escape?
The security situation in Gaza is very tense, and especially in the south. And that's not unrelated to the fact that unemployment is so high, poverty is so high, and that 80% of the population is refugee.
In the short term, Israel can close Gaza, but at what cost? Chris Clark, ABC News, Gaza.
As many as 60 people, most of them children, have died in a fireworks explosion at a school in southeast China. Police say an illegal fireworks factory had been set up inside the school, and young children were assembling crackers at the time. Another 27 people were hospitalised. The blast destroyed much of the school, which had been making fireworks for 3 years. 3 children from Papua New Guinea who suffered terrible burns in kerosene lamp explosions last month are making a good recovery. But their families won't say whether they're seeking compensation from petroleum giant BP.
This 5-year-old boy is one of the survivors. With burns to almost 50% of his body, he's one of 3 children and 4 adults flown from Papua New Guinea for urgent medical treatment. Last month, the Madang province was rocked by explosions caused by kerosene lamps filled with contaminated fuel from a BP depot. 5 people were killed and 30 injured.
They wouldn't have done well up there because they would have got infected very quickly and then the skin grafts wouldn't take.
Joseph Yangi lost a daughter in the explosion.
Still they can remember that fire and the explosion through the house.
His 5-year-old son Lawrence has had extensive skin grafts.
Thank you to the hospital here in Brisbane, and they might say we might prepare to go home very soon.
2 of the adult patients flew home this morning. The other 2 are expected to leave in about a fortnight, but it's likely to be a much longer hospital stay for the 3 children.
Discharge has not been contemplated at this stage, and I imagine that their course will be a number of weeks yet.
The 3 may require additional grafts, while the 13-year-old girl is in a serious condition with lung injuries. The families won't comment on whether they'll be seeking compensation from BP. Alison Smith, ABC News, Brisbane.
Now, more on today's finance news with Phillip Lasker.
Thanks, Richard. The interest rate news gave the Australian share market a lift. Index heavyweight News Corporation drove the market up, along with Telstra. Telstra's profit result lifted the stock nearly 4.5%. Australia's biggest home lender, the Commonwealth Bank, rose, but overall the sector was mixed. Santos jumped to a 3-year high on speculation of strong profits and a special dividend to be announced on Friday. But reports that the federal government is under increasing pressure to block Shell's bid for Woodside Petroleum hit the Woodside share price. Regional markets were marginally positive, high-tech stocks in demand after further gains on the Nasdaq. Commodities are mixed, the oil price posting a slight gain, and the Aussie dollar continues to struggle at 51.4 US cents. Its low for the day was 51.2 cents. And that's the day in finance. Richard.
Thanks, Phillip. Nearly a century after it was first mooted, Australia's National Museum is about to open its doors. Workers are racing to finish the $155 million building in time for Sunday's official opening.
Canberra's new landmark follows founding architect Walter Burley Griffin's vision of elegant buildings embracing the lake. But the National Museum's architect Howard Raggett has taken some liberties.
It's got lots of colours on it, hasn't it, which is not very Canberra. And I guess we thought it's a new millennium, we can introduce a kind of a new way of thinking about buildings.
The museum has largely turned its back on the 20th century. Less than 2% of its historical objects are on display. Instead, a myriad of multimedia screens and displays pumping out images, ideas and lots of words. The museum is being promoted as a place where Australians can confront the contentious issues of the day. But the most controversial word of all, sorry, is hard to find. When planning the way to present conflicts between white and black Australians, director Dawn Casey deliberately decided to leave it out.
It does upset a lot of people, and what we want to achieve at the museum is to create a better understanding of all the issues.
We had citizenship, but we had no recognition of our lands.
Instead, visitors are encouraged to listen to Indigenous stories and decide for themselves whether to be sorry or not. For traditionalists who like real objects, there's some old favourites like the giant heart of racehorse Phar Lap, and something new, the black dress worn by baby Azaria Chamberlain who disappeared at Uluru. Museum entry will be free except for blockbuster exhibitions. The first of these, Gold and Civilization, contains treasures ranging from giant nuggets to jewellery and objects from around the world. Anne-Maria Nicholson, ABC News, Canberra.
The music swapping website Napster has agreed to begin blocking access to copyright music offered on its site. The company had previously said it would appeal against a court order that it stop offering free music downloads. But today, Napster agreed to abide by the ruling to end the practice. A fresh injunction puts the burden of identifying copyrighted material on record companies. The companies have to notify Napster of the song, artist and file name to be blocked. Napster then has 3 days to comply. Big record companies have welcomed the ruling, claiming Napster is depriving them and musicians of millions of dollars. And finally tonight, Efforts are underway to help solve a Sydney mystery. Authorities want to verify the author of a piece of concrete inscribed with the word eternity. It's hoped it could be a rare example of the work done by the well-known chalk graffiti artist Arthur Stace.
This is the block of concrete at the centre of the Eternity Mystery. Labourer Trevor Kelly came across it 20 years ago in the rocks when he was repaving a walkway. He repositioned it to protect it.
His signature was everywhere, all over town, on walls and that. It was pretty obvious even then that he was going to become, you know, well remembered in history.
The word eternity appeared on the footpaths of Sydney over and over from the 1930s to the 1960s. Arthur Stace was the author. He'd been a petty thief and alcoholic, but reformed and began his eternity mission after hearing a Baptist sermon. The image lit up the Harbour Bridge during the year 2000 New Year's celebration. Now Trevor Kelly says the piece of concrete might be a valuable public asset.
There's no characters anymore. They seem to have disappeared.
A forensic document examiner will study the writing over the next 2 days to verify its authenticity. It's believed the only remaining Arthur Stace chalk original is inside the bell on top of the old GPO. It's fading and there are no plans to preserve it. Joe O'Brien, ABC News, Sydney.
Let's see what the weather has in store now with Mike Bailey.
Thanks, Richard. Good evening. Well, more heavy rain to report from the northern half of the coast, with some moderate to heavy showers also around Sydney. First, our weekly check of the El Niño monitor, the Southern Oscillation Index. It's down 3 points, but remains in the region associated with above-average rain. Some sunshine between the showers in Sydney today lifted temperatures from 21 to 27 degrees, a top that was one above average. Canberra's range was 11 to 25, and it was mostly dry. Air pollution in Sydney low. It should be similar tomorrow. High tide just before 8 in the morning, 1.9 metres, and sunrise at 6:48. Temperature now in Sydney, 24 degrees. That's right on the average. Relative humidity 74%, the wind a gusty sou'easter, and the pressure rising. For tomorrow, pretty much more of the same. Showers will be moderate to heavy at times, cloudy periods persisting, and fresh to strong southeasterly winds. 21 to 25 degrees near the coast, 19 to 25 inland. Well, temperatures today followed the pattern of the last day or two, down a little on the average along parts of the coast where winds were strongest and cloud was thickest, but inland it remained warm. The top rain for the 24 hours to 9 this morning was Comboyne at 168 millimetres. Mount Seaview had 35 millimetres, 9 to 3, and those falls have resulted in flood warnings now being current for a number of northern rivers. Balranald had the top score on temperatures today with 35 degrees, and Charlotte Pass this morning got down to 2. Now for tomorrow, and temperatures again not varying too much on the levels of today, still affected by strong to gale force winds along the New South Wales north coast. The forecast dominated by those wind warnings, a gale warning between Tweed Heads and Yamba, and also for the Tasman Sea, a strong wind warning between Yamba and Port Kembla, and flood warnings. Well, the Barwon and Darling rivers have been subject to warnings for some time, but added to the list tonight, parts of the Hastings, Bellinger, Manning and Williams rivers along the coast. Isolated showers are expected to increase somewhat about the south too, but the ACT should miss out, partly cloudy and remaining fine. 25 the top tomorrow, and for Friday, Saturday should be fine with a top of 27. The satellite image tonight shows the main feature is clouds swirling around a low-pressure cell off the northern New South Wales and southern Queensland coasts. That system looks like dominating the weather for another couple of days, and the air mass between that and the high down to the south is leading to very strong to gale force winds onto the New South Wales coast. The prognostic chart doesn't indicate too much movement by the systems, so more of the same tomorrow for most areas. That means Sydney too, of course. With further showers, they will be moderate to heavy at times. A similar outlook for Friday, but by the start of the weekend, the low should be starting to move away. Showers clearing on Saturday, should be fine Sunday. Richard.
Thank you, Mike. And that's the news to this minute. But we'll leave you tonight with more of the new National Museum's first special exhibition, Golden Civilization, featuring treasures from around the world. Good night.